As we continue looking at the Sermon on the Mount, we now move into another section after we've seen about how we are to practice our righteousness in the first 18 verses of chapter 6. And before that, Jesus, of course, has been teaching about what true righteousness looks like in his kingdom. But now we get into a section of Matthew chapter 6 that starts focusing on kingdom priorities. And so we're going to be looking as we recognize that the righteousness that pleases God requires citizens of God's kingdom to be devoted to God in a way that seeks his kingdom and righteousness above everything else in life. We need to evaluate ourselves. Are we there? Are we putting these things that we're learning about righteousness into application in our lives? Unfortunately, even good-intentioned people who have a desire to be righteous can easily become distracted by the things of this world so as to fail to seek God in this way. Maybe that's been true about you, or maybe it's just a general truth, but certainly it is something that I think we all can struggle with, that even if we want to be righteous and we want to follow God, that it's really easy for things of this life to crowd out the kind of righteousness, the kind of life that is truly pleasing to him. And now, Jesus begins to address this need, to put the focus in life on what truly matters. So we're going to look at Matthew chapter 6, verses 19 through 24. Let's begin by looking about two treasures in Matthew chapter 6, verses 19 through 21. Jesus said, "Don't store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves don't break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." You know, Jesus knew, as he was God living in the flesh, and Jesus knew how easy it is for people to get pulled into earthly desires and pulled into earthly concerns so that those things could become the primary pursuit in life. Again, think about in your own life of how easy that is to happen. Just kind of to get consumed with the things that are going on here in this life and not be focused on where we really should. People often lay up or store up their treasures on this earth. What does that mean? All right, well, examples of treasures stored up on this earth in Jesus's time, well, it may have been clothing. It may have been precious metals like coins or something. There were certain things that would have been perceived as being valuable to a person on during Jesus's time, and storing those things up here on this earth, if that's the true pursuit. Today, it can look many different ways. Today's treasures include, the clothing, the precious metals, certainly money, but there's many other material possessions. Again, it could be houses, it could be vehicles, or any number of things that are material possessions, even pieces of technology or whatever. And Jesus demonstrates the reality of having treasure stored up on this earth. He puts it into perspective for us. Again, it can be so easy and enticing to want to store those treasures up. You know, they touch things that are very apparent in life that we see other people having or enjoying, or things that touch pieces in us physically that we may want. However, Jesus puts it into perspective for us. What is the true result of storing up treasures on this earth? So think again about the clothes and the precious metals or the coins that would have been very common in Jesus's day. He talks about, well, you store those things up on this earth, moths can get to them, rust can destroy it. And so those things would threaten to eat away at those treasures, those things that you put so much stock into, that you think about so often, but yet they're eaten. And then he talks about how thieves could just break in and steal the treasures. Now, maybe in Jesus' day, maybe that looked like a thief digging through the clay wall of a house or whatever it may have been, but a thief could take those things away. And therefore, his point is that whatever you possessed that was seen as being this tremendously valuable thing could easily and quickly be taken from you. You might look at a passage in Proverbs 27 and verse 24 that also helps to make the same kind of point. And James 5 verses 1 to 3 with a warning there to the rich. Be careful what you put your emphasis on in life. Be careful what you put yourself and your stock into. But there's something else that, interestingly, Jesus doesn't mention here in this passage, but he does mention elsewhere. Jesus also mentions the threat in other places about that certainly will happen to everyone, even if the moth and the rust and the thieves don't get to your treasures here on this earth. Although they all can degrade, but even if we could be successful in protecting them and in preserving them, you're not going to keep them from death, from when we die, being separated from these treasures. Luke chapter 12, there's a parable that Jesus teaches there. Luke 12, verses 16 through 21, about this rich man who was building even greater barns and just storing up everything for himself so he could just take it easy, eat, drink, and enjoy himself. But yet God said to him, "You fool, at this night your soul or your life will be required of you. Then whose will those things be that you've prepared?" And so that's a very real thing that we need to recognize, is that death is coming, and all of these physical treasures will be taken away, no matter how much or how little you may have. If you put your focus on the physical, the earthly, they will be taken away from you at death. Luke 16 also gives this depiction in verses 19 through 31, where there's the rich man and there's Lazarus, and one's of course very rich and has basically whatever he wants, and another man can't even get just these small little crumbs. It's all that he has access to. He'd like to just have the table scraps for the dogs. But they both die, and they both continue on. And so we recognize that the riches didn't help the rich man. In fact, he found himself in torment in Hades. In Ecclesiastes 2, verses 18 through 23, again, another passage that demonstrates just how useless the pursuits of wealth really are, because death will come to everyone. And so we need to recognize that now as we think about where we're putting our treasures. Where are those things that are so important to us? And so a person should therefore have no confidence in treasure that is stored up in earthly places. If you can put your treasure somewhere on this earth, then it's not the treasure that you should be storing up, because it can all be wiped out through various means in an instant, and certainly at death. So in contrast to that, Jesus said that treasures should be stored up in heaven. Now, the reason he gives is that the treasures that are stored up in heaven, when we store up treasures where God resides, well, those treasures aren't subject to the decay and the destruction and the theft that earthly treasures are subject to. So all those things we just talked about, Jesus shows that, okay, in heaven, the moths can't eat it. The rust can't destroy it. The thieves can't break in and steal it. Instead, their reward is imperishable, undefiled, and unfading. 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 3 through 5. You can also read Revelation 21, verse 1 through 22 and verse 5 in this tremendous picture of this heavenly city. And so, again, step back and really reflect on these things. Where are you storing your treasure? To store up treasures in heaven requires that you value the things of God and you work to carry out His will in your life right now. That's how you make deposits into your heavenly bank account, so to speak. Now, Jesus is not teaching that people cannot have bank accounts to prepare for future physical needs or to have nice things. I don't believe. But he is teaching about the nature of our treasures and the location of our hearts. The nature of our treasure and the location of our hearts. Verse 21 makes it abundantly clear that Jesus is concerned where a person's heart is. That is, where a person's allegiance, a person's affections lie. You know, what are you truly devoted to? Who has your allegiance? Colossians 3 and verse 4, is your mind focused on the things above or the things on this earth? Well, if we truly store up treasures in heaven, then our focus is going to be there. In fact, Jesus demonstrates that the way you can identify the location of your heart is by locating your treasure. And I think that's immensely valuable for us. It's really easy for us to deceive ourselves, to say, yeah, we want to serve God, we want to put God first, and those kinds of things. But Jesus says, if you really want to find your heart, you find where your treasure is. And so you need to ask yourself, are you more concerned with your earthly bank account or with your spiritual bank account, so to speak? And again, even that can be easy to dismiss at first and to know our intentions, to know that we want to serve God, but then we just get wrapped up in the things of this life. So, evaluate how much time is spent adding to your physical bank account versus your spiritual bank account in one way or another. Evaluate how much energy you put into adding to your physical bank account versus your spiritual bank account. Evaluate how much focus you put on adding to your physical bank account versus adding to your spiritual bank account. Evaluate how much money you put into adding to your physical bank account or those things that you possess, your treasures on this earth, versus how much money you put into adding to your spiritual bank account. Truly evaluate yourself. Step back, look at the fruit. What does your life show you about where your treasures are? And when you find your treasure, then you will find your heart, Jesus shows us. And you'll know whether your true allegiance lies with God or whether it is on things here on this earth. But next, as we continue in Matthew chapter 6, we see not only are there two treasures that Jesus talks about, two types of treasures, whether treasures in heaven or treasures on this earth, but he also then talks about the possibility of having two types of eyes. Let's read in verses 22 and 23. Jesus says, the eye is the lamp of the body. If your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. So if the light within you is darkness, how deep is that darkness? Now, I think context is going to help us as we think through what's he talking about with the eye. There's different things we could think about regarding the eye, but when you look at it in its context of what we've just seen about these two types of treasures and what we're going to see next about having two possibilities of masters, well, he's still talking about where our focus is, where our priorities are, I believe. And so he says that the eye is the lamp of the body. Think about what the eye does. The eye is an organ through which light is perceived. And through that functioning, one can see and navigate his or her way in life. Now, a good or healthy eye is one that sees things as it should. Think about that physically. You know, a bad eye, a corrupt eye in a physical way will distort what one sees. Maybe it's blurred vision or double vision. If you've ever had those problems or known people with those problems, you know that it's hindering how you perceive things in this world, and it's hindering how you direct your steps then, or some who are even unable to see because they're blind, versus somebody with good eyesight. And it processes all the light that comes into the eye and translate that as the eye and the brain work together, and then you can navigate through your life. So the eye that is good leads to the entire body being directed to what is clearly perceived, so that the whole body then is filled with light. We can make the right choices, take the right steps, go the right places, all of those things because we see clearly. While the eye that is bad leads to the entire body being misdirected according to the distortions of what has been perceived. So our whole body is like we're filled with darkness and we don't really know how to navigate the world around us, and so forth. So with this image, okay, as we've just kind of been thinking through the physical process of the eye and how that impacts our lives, with this image, Jesus isn't focused on a biology lesson about the importance of a healthy eye. He isn't teaching us to go to the eye doctor and take care of our eyes and those sorts of things. Instead, I believe it's an image to teach about the importance of having the right focus and priorities in life. Think about it. What is our focus? That our eyes, they focus on things. So if you are singularly focused on what truly matters, if your eye is good and you are focused on the right things, if you are focused on what truly matters, the heavenly treasures, then you're going to see clearly about how you should act and how you should react in life in pursuit of that singular goal. Again, if I'm focused on living my life to please God, to store up treasures in heaven, if I'm focused on that in my life, then I'm going to perceive all the different things that go on around me through that lens. And I'm going to direct my life in the way that brings about that goal, according to what God has told me to do. However, if you have either entirely or partially distorted your focus and made your focus about the things of this life, then you're not going to make your life about what truly matters. If you put your treasures on this earth, well, as you make decisions and you act and you react to things that happen in this life, and you make priorities and all of those kinds of things, you're going to get off the path that you need to be on and start drifting in varying degrees away from God. This life that focuses on earthly things rather than the things of God, it's got a lot of consequences to it. For one, it's never truly satisfied. I know that so often we're told, we just need to make things about ourselves, and we just need to focus on enjoying life and those kinds of things. And there's a place for enjoying the blessings of God, but don't think that the more you focus on earthly things that it's going to lead to satisfaction. Ecclesiastes 1 and verse 8 and other passages make the point that, you just don't find satisfaction through physical things. Another thing that's going to happen, if you desire to be rich and you love money, well, it's going to bring great devastation on yourself in various ways. You're going to pierce yourself through with many griefs. Certainly, like the author, King Solomon, of the book of Ecclesiastes demonstrates, he was grieved by his wealth because he recognized he couldn't take it with him. He's laboring so much to do all of these things, and at the end of the day, it's not going to be his at the end of his life. And there's other ways you can pierce yourself through with many griefs as you pursue earthly treasures. And third, you're ultimately going to have a treasure that's going to be taken away from you. Luke chapter 12, again, in that parable of the rich fool, that's exactly what Jesus taught. Here's a man who stored up all these things, thought he had his whole future laid out, and then it was taken away from him when he died. And so you need to be singularly focused on the things of God. And that will have a positive impact on every decision and every way you act and react and all of those things. But only if you truly put your focus where it should be. But the final verse that I want us to look at in this lesson is verse 24, where we have Jesus teaching about two different kinds of masters. Look in verse 24. He says, "No one can serve two masters, since either he will hate one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money." Now, after establishing that there are two types of treasures and there are two types of eyes, Jesus now focuses on the possibility of someone trying to serve two different masters. Now, the circumstance Jesus is addressing here is that of a slave-master relationship. And so we've got to kind of venture down into that world or back to that world in order to understand the picture and the real point that he's trying to get us to understand here. So this slave-master relationship, the relationship that he's describing is one where the slave was under the authority of a single master. And he couldn't be loyal to that master and be loyal to another master at the same time. It just doesn't work. During the time Jesus spoke, this type of relationship was very common throughout the Roman Empire, which is, again, the physical context of the day. The Roman Empire and slavery was very common under the Roman Empire. And so when we think about loyalty, you are under the master that you have. You can't serve two different masters. And so it is with loyalty to Jesus in his kingdom. His servants must be totally committed to him as the one who bought them, as the one who redeemed them from the terrible master of sin. Jesus uses this image of being a slave or servant in Romans chapter 6. Paul records this for us to describe the way that those who are Christians are under under slavery to righteousness instead of slavery to sin. Now, it's easy for us to hear that kind of an image and really be off-put by it. But I think we really got to challenge ourselves. Imagine living in their world. And it's not a matter of if you're a slave, but a matter of who's your master. So put yourself in that kind of a situation. And then to think about, for us spiritually, either we are slaves to sin, which is a terrible master, or we're slaves to Jesus, who is a good and kind and gentle master who has sacrificed himself for us. And so that's the picture. And he's the one who has purchased us with his precious blood. 1 Peter 1, verses 17 through 21, not with things that are corruptible, silver and gold, right? Not with money, but with his blood. Jesus laid down his life to die for us. Luke 9, verses 23 through 26, Jesus calls upon us to follow after him and deny ourselves and take up his cross daily and follow him. Luke 14, verses 25 through 33, talks about the importance of counting the cost, that he comes first in our lives. And that's what he expects, and that's what he deserves. Because he redeemed us, he bought us back from sin with his blood. However, it's common for people who want to serve in God's kingdom to only desire to do such on a part-time basis, while they then serve other masters. This passage in particular, Jesus talks about serving the master of money. Luke chapter 16, verse 13 talks about the same principle of not being able to serve two masters. And again, in the context of wealth or money or mammon, some of the translations have it. You can't do that. You cannot serve Jesus and be committed to a different master. You've got to pick where your allegiance lies. Now, yes, we've got work that we have to do in order to provide for our families and those kinds of things, but we don't do that in pursuit of the master of money, but instead we should do that in pursuit of the master of Jesus, who wants us to provide for our own. In fact, serving God is unlike the service of many of the Greek gods. Again, you think about what was so common in those days, not necessarily in the region that Jesus was in at this particular time, but certainly in Gentile regions when you think about the various gods that they tried to serve. With these, you could have all kinds of different gods. It was perfectly acceptable to serve many different gods. You can see that in Acts chapter 17 when Paul was in Athens. But yet with God, with the true God, that's not the case. He deserves a person's entire allegiance. And therefore, it is impossible to serve God alongside of your devotion to any other master. You simply can't do it. Jesus particularly singles out the master of money, the master of possessions, the master of wealth, or mammon. In fact, in another place, in Colossians 3 and verse 5, God equates covetousness with idolatry. And so don't think you can serve these two masters in your life. Put your focus, put your allegiance on both. You've got to make a choice. And so Jesus has been helping us throughout this lesson to see that there are two possible treasures that we can have. There are two types of eyes that we can have, and there are two possible masters that we can serve, either God or another. So as we close, being in Jesus's kingdom requires focus, and it requires devotion in his service. He has demonstrated this to us by the need to store up treasures in heaven rather than storing up treasures on this earth. He has demonstrated this to us by the need to have a healthy focus on serving God. And he has demonstrated this to us through the need to be loyal to God as your only master. While there are many opportunities to become distracted by the things of this life, citizens of the heavenly kingdom must understand the need to prioritize his kingdom and righteousness above all else. And he'll continue to demonstrate that in the next section that takes us through the end of the chapter. So we've got to evaluate for ourselves, where are our priorities? Are we truly having kingdom first priorities that focus on God and his kingdom and his righteousness?